Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Hospitality Resilience series. Wonderful to have you all with us today. So thank you so much for joining for what's going to be a fascinating conversation. My name is Chris Mumford. I'm the founder of Service Leadership Consulting, and I'm also head of leadership services at Hokuso. And I'm delighted, as always, to be joined by my two esteemed colleagues, Jonathan Humphreys and John Hazan. Say hi, guys.
Hello, good afternoon.
Jonathan is chairman of Hokuso and also head of international hotel development finance specialization at Glion Hotel School. John Hazan is an executive coach and runs Atlas Coaching and Atlas Events. This is number 7, can you believe it? Number 7 in our series of resilience talks. We have covered a wide variety of topics to date. If you Google Hospitality Resilience Series, you'll find access to all of our past sessions. We've gone through things from adaptability, personal transformation, mindfulness to nutrition and sleep. The three of us established the Hospitality Resilience Series really as a community project aimed at supporting leaders in the hospitality sector to develop their own personal resilience and their inner immunity. The thinking being, or the theory being, that as individuals they become stronger and healthier leaders, so too will their organizations and teams benefit and hopefully engender greater resilience for the sector as a whole. A quick mention, as you just saw on the slide, for the Hospitality Resilience Study, which is a survey that we are doing in conjunction with the University of Central Florida. The purpose of the survey is to develop KPIs to measure resilience levels among leaders in hospitality, and thereby in turn help develop supportive initiatives that can help foster greater inner immunity and resilience going forward. If you didn't catch the link, I think Leah's going to put it in the chat. Otherwise, go to hokuso.com and you'll find access to the survey. It's 3 to 5 minutes. We're closing it soon, so if you are willing to take part, please do so at your earliest convenience. We're going to have some very interesting results coming out of that shortly. So let's get to today's session. The clock is ticking. These sessions are highly interactive, so please feel free at any time to pop a question into the chat. John will then feed those into the conversation as we go along. The session is being recorded. It will be available at a later date as a podcast in a video format, as well as an article. So I'm going to hand over to Jonathan without any further ado, who can tell us a bit more about what's in store for us today. Jonathan.
Thank you very much, Chris. Welcome everybody to today's session, Hospitality Resilience Series on developing psychological resilience for sustained success in elite sport. So you're probably asking yourself, well, why is this relevant to us as hospitality professionals? So pro athletes, elite athletes, they operate under pressure individually and as a team. They face all kinds of external challenges beyond their control and also internal challenges that are within their control. Beyond their control includes the fans, the media, the clubs, the financial pressures, injuries. Within their control is their mindset, their motivation, their dedication, their focus, and their performance. Pro athletes need to have a certain mindset to overcome, adapt, and respond to the environment thrown at them. In a way, this links to all of us. These are unprecedented times, which we've highlighted in previous sessions, and there are many factors that are outside of our control. So how can we try and take control of ourselves? We're looking for guidance and we're looking for examples, and we're looking outside the industry as well as within for inspiration. This session will cover the psychology of the individual and as a team. But it will focus on and also explain that this is not a lone expedition. We can't do this by ourselves, but it is dependent upon a community that engages and builds trust and where we feel safe to fail as well as to win. Just for those of you that would like a little definition, the definition of a professional is either relating or belonging to a profession or engaged in a specified activity as one's main paid occupation rather than as a pastime. In that regard, we are all professionals. And Therefore, I'm sure that we can find parallels in today's discussion, which can hopefully benefit us all. I'm absolutely delighted to introduce you to Mr. John Hazan, who's going to introduce our guest speaker today, Mr. Chris Bodman. Thank you very much, John.
Thanks, Jonathan. We are indeed very fortunate to have Chris with us today. So a little bit about Chris. He's been working in elite sport for the past 17 years, initially as a strength and conditioning coach with Gloucester County Cricket Club before transitioning as a chartered sports psychologist, where he has been fortunate to be involved in a lot of elite sport and working with various organisations such as the English Institute of Sport, Rugby Football Union, England and Wales Cricket Board, Somerset County Cricket Club and Gloucester Rugby. His work during this time has focused on finding ways to improve, as Jonathan mentioned, both the individual and the team's performance at both a physical and a psychological level. And again, as Jonathan has mentioned, these athletes are under incredible pressure, and this very much comes hand in hand with playing at that level of sport. Chris recently founded his own company, Lumentary Performance. Apologies if I've mispronounced that, Chris. You'll have to correct me later. This draws on his experience from, as you've just heard, those various organisations and teams that he's been working with to offer these experiences and skills to private clients in our world. There's a wide range of services where he teaches those to empower those to improve their minds, their bodies, and their behaviours through learning and development experiences. The models that Chris has used throughout his career, particularly around the concept of challenge and support, echo some of those themes that we have touched on already in this series, and undoubtedly have parallels that we can learn and apply, as Jonathan has mentioned, in our own lives. Perhaps, Chris, by way of setting the scene, you might begin by perhaps explaining to us why you think it is that some athletes and teams are better able to withstand the pressures of elite sport and attain their peak performances, whereas others succumb to the demands or underperform. Perhaps that's a decent place to start. Over to you, Chris.
Thanks, John, Jonathan, Chris. Great to be here, and everybody listening. I hope this is going to be a useful session for you. Killer question to start. Great question, and I wish I could give it a definitive answer, but unfortunately not. I guess the kind of study and application of resilience then aims to address that question to some degree. So by the end of this conversation, we may be a little bit more mindful as to what that looks like. I think, again, just to put a bit of context into what I do now, to simplify my role, I think is around kind of helping people think and people on the most part in a sporting environment to think better, to be able to achieve their performance, whatever that performance is. And similarly, to be able to help people within groups or teams to be able to do that as well. And I think there's similarities but differentiation between the two. And so going back to that question, again, it would suggest that characters who display a level of resilience, certainly in a sporting context or sporting environment, are more likely to then achieve that success over those that potentially aren't able to tap into that or aren't aware in terms of how to get to that part. So what I'm going to do, if okay, it's going to be a combination of just be guided by some slides just to give some information, but again, I kind of keep sharing and off screen so we can have some conversation around this. So as we see, and as we've said already, there's resilience in sport has probably been talked about in the media quite a lot recently, and by recently I'm probably talking the last decade or so, and in conjunction with that, I think there is an intention for us to try and understand what resilience actually meant within a sporting context or sporting environment. So the quote at the top of this slide, when we're looking at what resilience might be, was from a duty of care in sport kind of government review back in 2017, just to say potentially what mental resilience is, and that some people may understand how to tap into that, and some people may not. And then based on that, then the initial research part from a sporting context really based it on looking at what mental resilience or psychological resilience meant to the individual. And some considerations were met in terms of what that looks like. And first and foremost, it was actually trying to define what resilience actually meant. But as importantly, I think what resilience was not. And so if we're to look at kind of an understanding of what a definition might be, then resilience might be considered in this sense is the ability for an individual to use their personal qualities to be able to withstand pressure, or for an individual to be able to use their personal qualities to maintain function. So whether that be well-being or in performance when under pressure or in pressurized situations. What resilience is a dynamic process. And again, I think this is a real fundamental thing to understand, that it's an interaction of not only an individual's qualities, but also, as kind of alluded to in that introduction, what the environment also provides as well. And it's also a proactive approach. Again, I think an understanding was that it's this reactive sense that I've been faced with I've faced a situation of adversity or something like that, and it's almost that bounce back ability to then respond to that. It's this reactive thing that we do, but resilience is very much this kind of trait that we can use as a preventative strategy to try and prevent these things from happening in the first place. I think at this point as well, just important to stay, even just from a language perspective, if we use the word resilience, then it kind of encapsulates those things in terms of this dynamic kind of part. It's this continuum. It's not this fixed trait. Whereas if we just change the terminology to resilient, then potentially that's given an impression of more of a fixed trait, or a fixed dimension in terms of we either have it or we don't. And again, I think using sport is kind of that metaphor looking from outside in. Then we often see these high achievers and these individuals or teams that achieve these great things and think, well, they've got something that I haven't. And that's certainly not the case. It's just an understanding as to how we can enhance and develop our own levels of resilience in whatever environment we find ourselves in. So if that's what it is, what it certainly isn't is this rare or special quality, as I've said. It's not this fixed trait. It's not just found exclusively within the person. And certainly another thing that it's not, and really important to consider, is it's not an absence or a suppression of emotion. Again, I think the belief is to show resilience, then we can't show emotion or we can't show vulnerability, and actually it's fundamental to be able to develop that concept, is that how can we understand what our emotion is providing, and how can we look to regulate that. So that's by means of definition. That's hopefully a good start point to say, right, if this is what we're talking about, then how do we go about trying to develop some of these personal qualities and some of these mindsets to be able to enhance that resilience. From a personal qualities point of view, again, it's qualities that we'd probably assume to be apparent. So qualities that are important in terms of development of resilience would be things like optimism, would be things like conscientiousness, so making sure that we're prepared and we're planned. Things like some level of extroversion, so some, the ability to show some outgoingness and be quite outgoing in our approach, and also understanding what our motivation is, where our motivation comes from, and even more so that intrinsic motivation, so that internal motivation to allow me to embrace some of these things. And then the interaction of some of those qualities with some of the kind of psychological skills, I guess, that we could align with them is that then how do we direct our thoughts? If we understand a bit more about where our thoughts are coming from and what they're and how they're responding to certain situations, how do we direct our attention, and how do we regulate that kind of arousal to then get that desirable outcome of this kind of optimistic, motivated mindset, this regulation of thoughts, this maintenance of attention, and this recognition of support to then be able to perform when we are in pressurized situations or when we've potentially faced situations of adversity. And then if I can just touch on the third thing here before maybe go into a bit of discussion around this individual approach, the evoke and maintain the challenge mindset is essentially, again, looking at ways to positively evaluate and respond to pressurized situations. So it might be using techniques or strategies based on your understanding and awareness as to where you normally operate to say, how can I maybe look at this slightly differently? Is there a different approach? And if I take that different approach, then will the outcome be determined by that? So again, essentially understanding what our thoughts, feelings, and emotions are doing at that point in time. And then, is this going to be conducive to me performing at my best? Or is there another way of looking at this situation? And do I need to be able to adapt to be able to be able to get a different outcome? The fourth point in this we'll kind of touch on in a bit, the facilitative environment. But again, I think that the top three are pretty fundamental in terms of understanding what that looks like on an individual basis.
Chris, I don't know if you're about to cover this, but I'm fascinated with from the individual approach, and perhaps by way of an illustrative example, one of the greatest challenges or bounce back challenges faced by a professional athlete at that level is injury, isn't it? Response from injury or return from injury. We read about it a lot. All of those qualities you've just outlined and that wonderful kind of need for a mixed approach and from a flexible approach. But have you seen any trends with the athletes you've worked with, any reliance on a particular quality or approach that has enabled them to bounce back stronger from injury?
Yeah, I mean, injury for any athlete is not what they want. And I think it's, again, first of all, a really interesting point, John, there that you raised is that, again, based on how we've defined it in that kind of dynamic approach to it, to what resilience is, that doesn't necessarily suggest that an individual demonstrates resilience in everything that they do. Yeah. So an athlete may show a high level of resilience in a training or a performance environment, but then when they do become injured, then that might become a real challenge for them, and they may not then necessarily display those same characteristics. Yeah, or similarly the other way. So I think it's a real good kind of distinction to make here that just because we display resilience in certain situations, that's not to say that we're going to demonstrate resilience in every situation that we find ourselves in.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking, I guess something topical at the moment, you could have great physical resilience, I'm guessing, but, if I'm an athlete thinking I'm about to go off to Tokyo this summer for the Olympics, having had it pushed last year, and probably spent the last 4 years, if I was in the last one, waiting for this event, and my physical conditioning can be peak, but the mental game of that, I mean, that must be a real test of resilience. There's that uncertainty: is Tokyo going ahead or not? Do I know if I'm going? I mean, how do they deal with that?
Absolutely. So again, uncertainty is a word, and there's so many things that are then out of your control. And again, I think it goes back to that challenge mindset that I need to differentiate between those things. All I can do is prepare for a date or a time that's proposed going to happen. Yeah, and if my attention is then focused on the things that are out of my control, i.e., is this going to go ahead or not? Am I going to be selected in the first place? What does it look like when we go to travel? Are we staying in an athlete village, or are we getting shipped in from? And all of these kind of considerations that essentially are out of the control. Then all of a sudden you're going away from those, again, the personal qualities and the bits that are going to enhance the resilience when that time actually does come. I think it's again a really valid point, Chris, and something that we've all experienced, no doubt, over this last 12 or 18 months in whatever we do. You know what I mean? The uncertainty of the not knowing has led us to be like, okay, am I focusing my attention on the right things, or is my attention being driven to those things that actually I don't know what the answers are at the moment? So again, I think, yeah, really, really valid point.
Chris, we've had a couple of questions come in. I wonder if I can jump in with these at this stage before we move on. A question from Anna. I'd be interested to hear if there is a difference in base resilience depending on the type of sport.
Okay. I think, again, different. I'm not sure that there'll be a different. So I think it would be a personal characteristic. So how you individually develop your resilience is going to be different for everybody. I don't know that there's any trend in particular sports too that suggests that certain athletes performing in certain sports are going to be more resilient than others. I think that's the point. From my understanding of that question, I'm not sure I've answered that well, but I think, as I say, it's a dimension that we can all develop to some level. So again, if we can individually increase our awareness as to where we sit on those personal qualities, to how we maintain that challenge mindset, and to how then we interact with the environment, I'd suggest that those athletes that develop the best resilience have a good self-awareness understanding first and foremost. And as I say, are then in an environment that really supports the development of that as well.
Yeah, you're about to come on to the environment and how much that influences a personal resilience. So perhaps that will embellish that point for Anna as well. Another question from Barbara. Could it be that being resilient in one area actually makes you weaker in another, i.e. a strong business person struggles with relationships or vice versa?
Okay, so again, a real valid point. And again, I wouldn't necessarily look at it in that way, just from a language perspective. So if I'm resilient in one thing, doesn't necessarily suggest that I'm weaker in another thing. If I display a higher level of resilience in one area and a lower level of resilience in another area, then again, it's just my understanding as to how can I develop that resilience in different contexts. But absolutely. So again, it might be that I'm conditioned or that I might find myself in situations of pressure, or I might have suffered adversity in certain contexts that's allowed me to develop that resilience in that area. Yeah. Whereas I might not be under that pressure or that challenge in another dimension of what I do. And so I've never necessarily had to go to that. We assume these kind of high performing teams, and again, let's put it into a sporting context. So these teams that are continually winning, we assume that they've got high levels of resilience, yeah, because they're continually winning. It might just be that they've never lost, yeah. So the fact that they've never suffered that adversity or that challenge of losing hasn't necessarily enhanced their resilience by any stretch. It might just be that they're better. So again, I think it's just putting into that balance to say, how can I understand how this works across contexts? Yeah, and it's not this fixed trait that I either am or I'm not. It's just, if it's successful in this particular situation, then why might it not be as successful in this particular situation? And then what are some of the other considerations that I might just need to involve?
We've clearly opened the floodgates here, Chris, because there's another question. Sorry, Johnny, do you want to go ahead with yours, and then I'll plug in?
Yeah, I'd just like to build on that point, Chris. I guess with regards to Barbara's point, and also tying it in with professionals, executives, when there's an impact on performance, and Chris, through your role as looking at leaders and recruiting leaders, when there's let's say a lag in performance, generally it's not actually to do with the immediate environment itself. It's actually most likely due to something else that is going on in their lives that's creating a distraction that maybe they haven't been able to focus on, give attention to, that's then impacted the individual. So I was wondering, Chris, if you could maybe explain how it's important to look at the whole of the person today from a sporting context when you're looking at developing, let's say, taking somebody through a rehabilitation, or making sure that somebody is on top of their game or a team on top of their game. And I was wondering if you could maybe give some examples. I don't know if you can name athletes or teams, but I think that holistic context, I think is quite important for people to understand, because I think Barbara's right that you can be very, very good at a particular area because you neglect a lot of other areas that are going on. And then something happens, maybe personally or something else financially, and it derails a lot of what you've been focusing on. Nothing to do with your competence, your ability for that particular focus.
Yeah, I think again, to give an example, then when we talk about kind of team resilience, I think that will certainly illustrate that. Essentially, like I say, certainly within a sporting context, it depends on your approach. My approach is very much person-centered. Yeah, so that isn't just that athlete as an athlete. That athlete is actually you're a person as well. So like we say, there's going to be a level of challenge based on your profession, but there's a whole host of challenge around that as well. So the more we get to know people, the more we understand what all the dimensions that come into that, then the better. And again, that's building relationships and having trust and again being open. And like I say, it's not a suppression of emotion. It's not to say that at times I can't seek that support. Yeah. So for individuals to recognize that actually by sharing this may help. Yeah. And it's not just about my performance on the pitch or in the boardroom or again, whatever context that is. It's just what are all these things that attribute to me being able to perform at my best. Yeah. To come back to that definition in terms of how I feel I can support people, it's just, again, it's how do you allow people to think better? Yeah. To be able to maintain and achieve the level of performance that they're trying to do.
I guess that's this facilitative environment that you referring to on your slide there, and it just puts to mind also you talk about language and I guess how attitudes have, I assume, changed. But John, you must have seen this in your military life as well. But resilience typically was kind of toughen up, get on with it. That was the definition of resilience, right? Get back up, keep marching, whatever. But from what you're saying, Chris, it's become much more holistic in the current environment, right? Which definitely, and I think then is the translation of that into the business context too now. Particularly with the pandemic we've been through, I think there's a lot more attention being thrown onto how do we holistically support people.
Support it, yeah. Again, a good case study example, I guess. So the picture on the slide before was of a track cyclist. Again, it kind of ties in a couple of things here, and then goes on to that the importance of the environment, I guess. So John mentioned injury, the cyclist, and before I kind of tell these stories, and then I've checked with the athletes here, so I'm not breaching any confidentiality. They're happy for me to share their story, just to say that first and foremost. But the athlete that was on the slide there, Vicky Williamson, is a track cyclist. In 2016, January 2016, had a catastrophic collision with another cyclist in competition. Suffered significant injuries. Again, like a real severe kind of injury to her right flank. She fractured a neck, prolapsed discs, multiple fractures in her lumbar spine. Where they're talking about paralysis here, you know what I mean? This is significant. Not only that, and again, this kind of puts things into perspective a little bit. So that's the important part of it. But from a sporting perspective, again, this was kind of 4 months out from Rio. Right. So again, her Olympic ambition or dream was just done and dusted. So this was done in a kind of a blink of an eye and whatever. I met Vicky 2 years later. So we're now talking 2018 in my role at the intensive rehab unit that I work with, which is a kind of a rehab facility that's funded by the English Institute of Sport and British Olympic Association. So she was still rehabbing. I think she's their longest standing athlete that's been in there, with a view to then literally getting back on the bike and competing again at top level. Yeah, that was her intention. So she's millimeters from suffering paralysis to then be like, okay, I've still got a job to do. I've still got unfinished business here, and I still want to fulfill my dreams, aspirations. So you look at resilience from that perspective. And again, my work with Vicky around what we spoke about was there were definite personal qualities there, no doubt. So again, you look at some of the personal qualities that she had. She was very optimistic, very driven, very kind of goal focused. All of those things were really important, and we, you can profile that and you can kind of get some more evidence as to what that looks like. So they were there in abundance. But again, just that challenge mindset to be like, okay, well, I can either just kind of dwell on the things that have happened, kind of why me, why did that happen, and then the what ifs, you know what I mean? Like I say, a couple of millimeters either way, and it could have been a very different story. Or you can just use that experience to say, okay, how can I learn from that, and how can I grow, and how can I continue to develop? And then the environment then really comes into play as well, right? So it's not just about her journey. Then it's about how that facility then collaborates with the British cycling environment, and how both of those environments support her, as well as her environment out of there. And throughout this time, I mean, I worked with her for probably about 6 to 8 months. She underwent another 2 operations, some significant kind of personal challenge going on as well in her personal life. There was question on whether she could even get back onto the program, yet alone compete at the level that she wanted to. Again, goalposts had changed, as we all know. Like even selection criteria changed in that time. New people had come into the team, so kind of all of these things were there, and yet she was still this kind of that's where I want to go. And it's management of that, to say those qualities and characteristics allowed her to get to that position, but at the same time needed to recognize that if I overdo that, so if I allow those qualities or characteristics to be overdone, then again potentially that can be a detriment to me, if that makes sense. So if I'm too optimistic, or I push myself too hard, then again that potentially could be negative. So again, that a real fine line in terms of wanting to champion those characteristics, not dilute them, but at the same time just regulate it and just say, okay, well let's just consider where we are and where we're at. So again, a kind of a real life example in terms of that. Beginning part of this year, she actually quit cycling to then train with the GB bobsleigh team. So to try and compete in the 2022 Winter Olympics, which again isn't just like, changing sports is one thing, but changing from indoor track cycling to pushing a bobsleigh is again, it's significant. So again, the whole challenge of that is just crazy. Having spoke to her a couple of weeks ago, having been successful in that pursuit, by the way, she's now been accepted back onto the British cycling team, and so again with a view to then going to Paris in 3 years' time. So again, I think just as an individual, just to look at that, I think is just a real good example as to what adversity in that sense, and significant adversity, is actually, is allowed her to do. And by talking to her and stuff that she's actually publicly said, she wouldn't have changed her experience. She feels like she's developed the characteristics she now has got because of what has happened to her. And feels almost quite fortunate that she's experienced that.
It's a story with a happy ending, Chris. That's we were all holding our breath, waiting for and she's still in rehab. So, no, amazing. She's now bobsleigh as well. I think you raised a very interesting point about what I might term mindless optimism as well. That fine balance you referred to. I think I learned the lesson quite early on in my military career that if you confront your soldiers with mindless optimism in what is essentially a pretty rubbish situation, you very quickly lose their respect. So there's the difference between an optimistic approach and a positive approach, but realizing that people need a check of reality. And we've seen that in the business world as well over the last few months.
And I think just briefly to touch on it, John, I think again it's dynamic. We need to know that we're not one or the other. It's not a fixed trait. We're not optimistic or not. You know what I mean? We may preference optimism as from how we've developed all the environments that we find ourselves in. But if we perform at that space the whole time, then like you say, at times it's going to be really, really beneficial, and at times it could be a detriment. So it's an understanding to say, okay, well, if this is where my preference is, then am I aware as to how I can adapt that if the situation needs? So it might be optimism at times is what I need. I just need to go both feet in and say, right, this is what I'm going to do. But in certain situations, it might be I need to dial that back a bit and just be a bit more sensitive to the potential risk if I do that. Yeah. And like I say, everybody will naturally fall somewhere between that risk and or that kind of sensitivity to risk over of that push for reward. And again, if we're self-aware enough, we've all got the ability to be able to shift up and down that continuum when we see fit, as opposed to just.
I'm really intrigued by the environment point, yeah. Chris, that you talked about earlier. Is there some? Can you expand on that a little bit?
Cool. Let me go on to the slide here. So again, something that kind of segues a little bit here. So the facilitative environment is really important for the individual, but kind of as important for the group or the team. So if I just go to this next slide, again, it probably wouldn't be a psych talk or presentation without some kind of quote in it. So again, I think a really relevant quote just to set this. So when a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which it grows, not the flower. Yeah, and again, the assumption is that we're always kind of looking at the individual or the athlete and not necessarily looking at how important the interaction of that environment is. But for the individual to thrive, then we really need to understand what the environment is doing to allow that to happen. So certainly around some of the resilience research within sport, again, and this is kind of come from other areas as well. But if we were to think of it, and again, I thought the easiest to illustrate this is we've got challenge on one axis and support on the other, and a high and low and a high and low. Okay, so this might get you thinking about the environments that you are either operating in or that you run yourselves. But if we look at a low level of challenge and a low level of support, then it's likely that we're going to kind of be in this relatively stagnant environment. Yeah, not much is happening. It's almost a bit of an existence in terms of just I'm there and I'm operating, and I'm not particularly pushing myself or being pushed, and similarly I'm not necessarily being supported or supporting others. So it would suggest there's not a great deal going on. If we were just to up the level of support a bit there, but the challenge is still low, then that may be defined as a bit more of a comfortable environment. And a comfortable environment is that the level of challenge is there at times, but the level of support probably outweighs that. Now, similarly, in certain situations, and that is really important to be in. Yeah, and again, I kind of refer back to this last 12, 18 months that we've gone through. Some environments have really made a conscious effort to be within that comfortable environment for the well-being of the people that are in that organization. Yeah, so they haven't necessarily had to increase a challenge, but just to make sure that the level of support is there. If we look at the other end, if the challenge is high and yet we don't provide support, then it becomes this unrelenting environment, yeah, which isn't sustainable, which kind of breeds that unhealthy competition, which probably initiates a bit of a blame culture where individuals don't feel supported, where it can impact on individuals' well-being. And again, in sporting context, then I don't need to cite examples of it, but we know in the media that there have been several examples of organizations where athletes have kind of said or described the environment to be like this, whereas I'm constantly being pushed or challenged, and yet I don't feel I'm given the level of support that I need. And so I guess where we really thrive to be is in this top right, where the challenge is high in terms of I want to be pushed, or the environment is pushing me to allow me to perform at my best or to become optimal. But similarly, the level of support that I receive is aligned to that. So that the more I'm challenged, then the more support that I've got access to. And that's the kind of environment where it's quite collaborative, it's quite an open and honest type environment. I think, like I say, people are prepared to go that extra bit because they know that they're going to be supported pretty well. So again, I think that's where we're trying to operate most of the time, in terms of certainly developing some of the characteristics and certainly developing resilience. But that's not to say that some of these other quadrants on the matrix aren't still important. So it doesn't need to be in this facilitative environment the whole time. It might be at certain points of time we need to just dial down the challenge, yeah, and maintain a high level of support. And it's okay to be comfortable for a bit, yeah. Or similarly, at times it might be we want to test this and we want to stress this a little bit, so we can go into that kind of unrelenting environment, knowing that we can't stay there, or if it has an adverse effect, then we've gone too far. So we need to get back to that kind of facilitative environment there.
So maybe can I expand on this, or just explore this a bit further? I mean, I like this idea of this facilitative environment, and in a business context, we talk about safe areas, trust, the ability to test, try, and also fail in a constructive environment. We've got a very good question here from John Paul Herzog. How difficult is it for a sportsman to come in second, win silver, but lose gold? But I'd like to expand on that a little bit with regards to that environment that you're creating. You know, how important is it to create an environment where the athletes are kind of feeling safe and secure, even to fail and get back up and try again?
Yeah. Again, I think absolutely it goes down, Jonathan, to what your objectives of that organization are. And we know that sport is like measured on outcome a lot of the time. And again, there's constant examples of sporting teams or organizations or particular sports where that outcome then overweighs the facilitation of trying to develop some of those things. So if success is deemed as winning gold, or winning matches, or winning tournaments, and that's not accomplished or achieved, then it becomes pretty short term. So I think, again, if the objective is to develop that person, or to allow that person to try and perform at their best, yeah, and their best might be silver, right? That's the other point. There's always somebody that may be better. So again, it's going back to that point to say that if we've done everything from an environmental perspective to provide the level of challenge and to provide the level of support, and similarly you've collaborated with that in terms of you've been receptive to it, in terms of you've driven that challenge and you've accepted that support, then I think that's as good a place as we can be. And if that results in a silver medal, and that's the conversation you're having, then I think that's much better to say that, as opposed to achieving a silver medal and being, yeah, but what if we'd have done this differently, or could we have done that differently, or did we support well there, or was that level of challenge too high?
And is there something to that, Chris, to say about the importance of recognizing the need to move from one quadrant, in this particular example, to another? And as you rightly said, you know, I'm familiar with the comfort, stretch, and panic zones. We can exist in panic. It's where we learn fast and furiously, but we can't exist for long. Therefore, we move back to stretch or comfort again. Yeah. Is that the same in this analogy with sport, that actually a manager or a coach will recognize the need to move that fluidly?
I think absolutely. It's almost a periodized approach, isn't it? And again, you can look at it to say, if we want this to be, if we want it to be sustainable, then we probably can't operate in the same place the whole time, right? So it's a recognition as to, like anything else when we plan or structure, is to say, well, when might it be useful to maybe, like I say, dial down the challenge a little bit, but ensure that the support is still there. I think the other consideration there, John, is challenge isn't just challenge that's presented on the field or on the pitch or on the court or on the track or whatever environment you're in. There's challenge everywhere. There's a whole host of challenge outside of that environment as well. So it goes back to the point of, if we understand and if we know the person, right, the challenge might not be how they performed on the weekend. The challenge might be what's going on in their personal life at home. Yeah. And so again, the support then needs to align to that level of challenge, as opposed to just assuming that we're providing them with psychological skills to be able to perform when it matters, without really understanding or knowing what some of those other challenges may be. As I say, with the example we've just used with Vicky, there was an obvious challenge in terms of that rehabilitation and recovery, but there was stuff going on in her personal life. There was, like I say, questions whether she was going to get back on the team. There's questions whether she was going to get funding. Before long, you're like, you know, it's the ripple effect, isn't it? That you've thrown a stone in the middle, before long you're on the ripple to the outside of the pond, and it's so far detached from where the actual kind of initial part came from that we're catastrophizing a little.
I wanted to jump in. I know, sorry, Jonathan, I noticed you had your mute button off. I just wanted, Yad's put an interesting question in around this point, Chris. He asks, in competing at that global level, the real challenge appears to be more cerebral than physical, is it not? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, again, I'd say yeah. Certainly in the line of work that I'm in at the moment. But again, I think it's both. It's twofold, isn't it? There's a physical level of resilience, and there's obviously a level that you need to try and get to and trying to achieve. It would suggest, and again, there's people have said it's the 2 inches up here or whatever that makes a difference, and maybe it does for some. I think they're as important as each other, but I think when you're really operating at top end, then again, it's just the more I can understand this or embrace this or kind of engage with it, then the more likely I am able to influence it. So I would, I wouldn't say one or the other. You've got to get to a level of physical resilience to be able to deal with that as much as you have mental resilience.
How do you do that, Chris, on a team base? I mean, I'm thinking it's an interesting question because you think of tennis, right? These individual sports where it's, that moment of like bouncing the ball up and down before serving, it's the kind of mental reset. And that's such a core part of making the difference in tennis. It seems in golf, probably the same. But how do you build that across a team, like in a team context? Yeah,
cool. So again, let me share again, because that kind of goes into, it's a slightly different. I mean, obviously the team element, again, I've put here, the assumption isn't that because you display resilience as a group of individuals, it suggests that the team is going to become a resilient team. So again, I think twofold. I think those individual elements that we spoke about are still relevant here, and the development of that is still important. So your own understanding of your own personal qualities, how you, like I say, how you embrace and evoke that challenge mindset, and how you interact and respond with the environment is really important to develop that resilience from an individual basis. But the research into team resilience is probably considered some other areas. And again, I just briefly go through these because I'm kind of aware of time. But if we look at transformational leadership, again, it suggests that there are inspirational methods here to inspire, to influence, to motivate, to provide morale, to allow for high performance within teams. And that the challenge support bit comes into this. Again, it refers back to that facilitative environment. Yeah. And again, probably another dimension to add to this is some kind of vision, which again, we've kind of touched on. Yeah. If my vision is very short term and closed and outcome based, then it's probably not going to be too helpful in terms of developing a team resilience. Whereas if my resilience is a bit bigger picture and longer term, yeah, and I stick to that, then that's probably going to allow team resilience a little bit more. Kind of to caveat a little bit there, I think that's real important to understand through organizational level. So again, if your leader or head coach in a sporting context displays this or has this, and it's important that other stakeholders within that organization also need to go with that, because if this is kind of broken at any point, then you lose it pretty quickly. So I think that's an important kind of part to say. Shared leadership was also important. So again, also spreading that ownership or spreading the leadership responsibility. Certainly, again, when remember what we're talking about when we're dealing in pressure situations, we're not just reliant on one person to come up with that decision-making process. So again, if we can share that amongst the team and understand different people's strengths and understand where different people might be able to come in and use those strengths well and have clarity in terms of what their role looks like within that situation, then again, I think that's going to be really useful in trying to develop a team resilience. Could
we explore that concept a little bit more, the shared leadership concept? And the reason I think it's helpful to explore this is because, you know, there is this kind of thinking that the leader should be held accountable. We see it definitely in sport, where there's a cry for a change of coach or manager as soon as, you know, one of the teams is facing, you know, risks of relegation or even they lose a few games. We see it in business as soon as there's a share price change. But I like this at least an angle of shared leadership, shared responsibility. It means in some ways that there is kind of a shouldering of responsibility amongst, you know, selected leaders. And maybe I just wondering if you can maybe explain this through an example that you've seen where this has kind of played out in a team or a sport.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Jonathan. So again, I mean, it's important for individual members of a team to lead each other, I guess. Like I say, we're trying to just diffuse the responsibility on one. So typically in a sporting team, you'd have a captain, and the assumption is the responsibility then lies within that captain. Now, again, certainly within successful teams that I've been involved in, and in sport probably more now in general, is that you tend to develop leadership groups. And that might be just to put together a number of players that are kind of co-responsible for what that looks like, both on the field and off the field. You know, it's not just about performance; it's about what goes off the field as well. So in this situation, again, just to put some context, this is the England Young Lions team, the under-19s team, who I worked with for a World Cup cycle. So within this team, within the team of 11 on the cricket pitch, we actually had a leadership group of five players. And that's not to say those 5 players are always on the pitch. You know, dependent on selection, then they may not have. But what it allowed us to do was to not only kind of, again, alleviate some of the pressure off that captain or off the captain and vice captain. Yeah, it also allowed us to look at the individuals that were selected to be part of that group, to say, okay, well, this guy's got something different to offer here, or a different way of thinking. And so at times under pressure, we know that we need to be clear of thought, or we know that we need to maybe look at the situation slightly differently. So by having that mix, then again, we really encouraged that conversation to happen. And similarly, again, you know, you need the right personnel there. If the captain's like, no, this is my decision, I don't want that input, then again, it's understanding those individuals to say, okay, when's the right time to be able to contribute something, or when's the right time to stand back from that. But again, I think what we also did with that group is that, again, historically, you'd have kind of support staff or coaches meetings or selection meetings, and then you'd then relay that maybe to the team or the captain, and we involved that group in all of our meetings. So the coaching group, there was total transparency in terms of, right, this is, you know, if this is what we're kind of suggesting you do when you go out on a pitch, then you really need to be pretty integral in understanding why that is, and also putting some contribution into that. Which for this group, again, these are under 19s, so that was pretty, again, talk about challenge. That was quite challenging for them just to be sat in that room, right? Because they used to just be being told as to what that looks like. So again, I think it's just being creative in terms of how you use that. I know that 2003 World Cup team, again, I think Clive Woodward famously says he was looking to create not just a good leader or a leader to then have a group of followers. He was looking to create an exceptional leader to lead a group of leaders. Do you know what I mean? So again, at any one time, then certain individuals could come in and actually share that responsibility, take that responsibility off that one person who was given kind of that captaincy or whatever role that was.
I wonder, Chris, does that mean, I know we're into our last 5 minutes, but I wonder does that mean that we're seeing a change in characteristic, a change in definition of what it means to be a leader, and that we can see this in the business world as well as in the sports world, that actually the command and control style of leader, that bold, decisive, fast-thinking leader perhaps isn't as relevant as it is today. It's now a more collaborative style of leader, a more EQ skills front that matters more.
Yeah, and again, I'm not saying one. You could argue that one is probably the latter is something that we probably want to try and seek towards, but that's not to say that at times that person needs to make the decision and have the ability to be able to say, no, this is what we're going to do. You know what I mean? So again, it's not just this kind of holistic collaborative approach that everybody's just discussing, no actions being taken. At times somebody's got to say, right, actually, this is where we need to be here. So again, I see the dimension similar to what we spoke about before. It's having the ability to be able to say, right, when am I best suited to stand back and maybe to get some input, or to let somebody else take that responsibility, compared to actually when is the time for me to stand up and to take it forwards and be like, right, this is what I'm going to do here.
I think you're absolutely right. The environment, as we've talked about today, shapes the style necessary, doesn't it? Again, if going back to my military experience, if I'd huddled down with my soldiers and given them a hug and asked them what they think we should do next as the rounds are pinging off around the turret, I probably wouldn't have been a very popular leader. So there's different times and different places for different skills and different styles.
Yeah, and like you say, the significance of what it is, you know what I mean? At that point in time, the significance of what you were experiencing needs action. Yeah, we haven't got the time to do that. Whereas in different environments and contexts, we can kind of ease off that a little bit, and we've got the luxury of being able to be a bit more collaborative and to discuss it, because the significance of that outcome may not be as great. Yeah, I think what's also important here, just to quickly work through these, that social identity bit kind of ties into it a little bit. Yeah, so again, that collectiveness, that we and us, as opposed to the I and me. And again, that's quite unique in this instance in a cricket team, because cricketers can be pretty individual. Yeah, it's an individual team sport in that sense. So again, what we really tried to promote here, and what these guys are really good at doing, was okay, well, how can we start to think of this as a collective, as to replace the I and me with the we and us, and what thought processes change there, because the thought process as I hold as I and me is going to be different to that thought process is we and us, what our collective understanding is to what we're trying to achieve. And so again, just from a practical kind of application point of view, that might revolve around, so we were kind of guided a little bit around what the senior England men were doing, and this notion, this kind of values piece, I guess, of taking the cap forward. So basically to almost leave your legacy in terms of those that come after you are coming into an environment where they feel that they can thrive and go with it. And so we kind of use that same element of essentially 3 pillars behaviors that we felt were important throughout England cricket, regardless of whether that was senior men or whether that was at under 19s level, but then putting the individuality of this team on that. Yeah, so what does this mean to you? This isn't just you doing this because your contemporaries do it or your peers do it. It's actually, let's work out what this is to you. So this is your input now, and this isn't a set of rules, or this is what we abide to, but it gives us a point of reference to say, well, collectively, then this is what we agreed, and I use we as players and support staff here. This is what we agreed is how we're going to action in this particular point or against this particular situation, or how we're going to behave with each other, whether that be on the pitch or off the pitch. And so if we're in agreement with that and we've all engaged and collaborated with that, then it's so much easier to then reference and be held accountable for, as opposed to it just being like, this is what you're going to do.
Great. Chris, thank you very much for the session. I'm going to try and do a wrap up here. You've covered so much, Chris, and we're as always we've run out of time. I'm going to just kind of try and summarize this in a holistic way. So we started off with the difference between resilience, which is dynamic, versus resilient, which is a fixed state. I think we can apply that to, the emotional aspect, which you talked about, which was, resilient was more about maybe suppressing emotion. Resilience is about adapting to the emotional environment. And I think then we looked at the ability to be adaptable and look at what's in our control and outside of our control. And you gave some very good examples of athletes that have gone through a transition and recovery where they really focused on the elements that were within their control. They could focus on their rehabilitation program, what they ate, how they were thinking that day, but they couldn't control their environment, which was whether they were going to be selected. So I think disconnecting those two things is very powerful. We talked about the long term versus the short term, and obviously it depends on the goal of the organization, but the alignment of that goal of the organization. But obviously, when there is the opportunity to create more of a long-term goal, we can focus on the more holistic aspects of the individual rather than the micro aspects of, let's just say, the pure win. And then you looked at the dimensions of team. And that just in resilient individuals doesn't necessarily mean it's a resilient team, but creating that facilitative environment. And I think you kind of brought it back in within that team dynamic as well. You've got this shared leadership, in terms of creating that kind of framework that allows for that shared responsibility where anybody can step up. And also there is a collective responsibility. I think is really helpful. And then you talked about the high challenge, high support. When the pressure is really on, there needs to be that facilitative environment where there is a holistic view of the teams and of the individuals, where people are looking at all aspects of their lives, not just the pure focus of what they're actually maybe performing at for their professional aspect. So I know you covered a lot more. It's been a really fascinating journey. I just wanted to say a big thank you. I'm going to hand over to John to say a thank you on our behalf, and then Chris is just going to do a final close. So thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, just a massive thank you, Chris. A fascinating topic, well explored and very succinctly put. So our huge thanks to you and for giving us your time. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan, John, and Chris, and thanks to all of you for tuning in and being with us today. Stay tuned for our next session, which will be on dynamic leadership with Patrick Gilmetti. Looking forward to that. Please check out our LinkedIn group page for more content and resources, and a final pump out for the survey, the Hospitality Resilience Survey, closing soon. All data welcome, so please take 3 minutes and complete that. That would be much appreciated. Thanks so much. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday. Take care.